Now I want to bring you the rest of the story, as it were, with Paul Harvey. More specifically, the conversation that I had with Dr. John R. Lott. We covered a lot of ground, did John and I, and I think you're going to really appreciate a lot of what he had to say about the SAVE Act in particular. If you think John is just all about guns and gun research because of crime prevention research, and he's a very huge Second Amendment advocate, and and he runs crimeresearch.org. If you think it's just about that, no, he's got so much more to offer here, as you will see in this interview, in this conversation. So let me bring you Dr. John R. Lott from just 2 nights ago. And here you go.
States is a real outlier.
Let's just dive into it here. I want to start with the SAVE Act. This is a little bit, I don't want to say it's out of your wheelhouse, because it's not, because you do research. You're a researcher. That's literally what you're trained as and studied as a researcher, and not just crime, not just gun stats and so forth, but all research. So why should you not get in on this? And so really interesting.
Well, I mean, I have a PhD in economics, and I've done a lot of research in my academic career on voting, vote fraud type issues. One of my more famous papers deals kind of the history of vote fraud. One of my more famous cited academic papers, but
then I'm going to have to
get that most people know about that. So
I was going to say, I'm going to have to get a little more acquainted with your most famous stuff then. I know most of your books and a lot of your articles, but I didn't know about your research papers. So that's.
But if my book Freedomnomics goes through like 45 of my 120 peer-reviewed papers, so it will give you at least a rough idea.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. Let's plug that one too. I mean, seriously, there's so much to get into, but so that gives us a little bit of a background around this. But what you wrote for Townhall here is why we need the Save America Act. Now, everybody who's watching this, and let me bring this up on the screen just so everybody can have a look-see for themselves too. There you go. So everybody who's, here, okay, we need the Save America Act. They're probably thinking, yeah, we hear that from Trump all the time. Yeah, we hear that from Stephen Miller all the time, and Vance and all the conservatives. So yeah, we get it. Yawn is what they're thinking. What have you done here, John, to cut through and clarify and make this a little bit more understandable about the importance, not just importance, but maybe it's integral. I think it's absolutely necessary for us to have this passed in order to ensure free and fair elections. So what are you bringing different to the table with this article than what we're hearing from all the others?
Well, I look at some of the criticisms that are made in terms of the fact that somehow it's going to disenfranchise Blacks and Hispanics. Mm-hmm. I also look at just the rest of the world. And what you find is that the United States is a real outlier in terms of not doing what all other countries just about considered essential things to ensure fairness and accuracy in elections. So, they claim that Hispanics will be harmed by this. I mean, you can look at polls of Hispanics and they support voter IDs, for example. But just look around the world. Mexico, all South American countries, Spain require government-issued photo IDs for people to be able to go and vote. Mexico requires proof of citizenship, which is exactly the same as what the proof of citizenship requirements are in the SAVE Act. Same with other South American countries. You look at Africa. The claim is that Blacks will somehow be disenfranchised by requiring them to have a government photo ID. I mean, first of all, if you look at surveys of Blacks and Hispanics, you get 75, 80% of those groups think that government-issued photo IDs are important. They don't believe that they're going to be discriminated against or that groups are discriminated against by that. But all the countries in Africa require government-issued photo IDs to be able to vote. All but 2 of the countries in Africa require proof of citizenship before people are able to go and vote. You look at Europe, there are 47 countries.
What does that say to you? Hey, John, before you go on, what does that say to you? Because as you pointed out in your article, Democrats in the media and in Congress and elected offices say that Black people can't get ID to vote. This is so discriminatory. Right. And you just said, well, they can do it in Africa. So what's our point?
Yeah, well, the same with Hispanics. I mean, as I said, you look at a country like Mexico, or you look at South American countries, the same rules for proving citizenship as what you see in the SAVE Act. You have a birth certificate, you have a passport, you have to have something to prove that you're a citizen of those countries in order to register to vote. And you have to have government issued photo IDs. In fact, in Mexico, it's much more restrictive. I mean, they have not only government issued photo IDs, but they have biometric information. They have things like a thumbprint. They won't send you the ID in the mail. You have to go in person to apply for it. You have to go in person to go and pick it up again. In some parts of Mexico, you're talking about 75, 80-mile trips that you have to make each way because there's maybe only one voter registration place in the state. And, and yet in 1991, when they instituted those types of reforms and also banned absentee ballots at the same time, you think, boy, you're making it much more difficult for people to vote. You should see a drop in the rate that people are voting. In fact,
what's that turnout look like?
You saw a big increase in turnout. In the 3 presidential elections prior to 1991, there was about a 59% turnout. In the 3 presidential elections afterwards, there was something like a 68% voter turnout. And so when people thought that vote fraud was being controlled for, was being dealt with, people were more willing to vote despite all those additional costs.
So, do we hear any left wingers in Mexico or in any of the African nations? And I'm looking at your article. You said that every country in Africa, every country on the continent requires government-issued identification to vote. And 51 of the 54 countries in Africa demand people actively submit proof of citizenship to register to vote. So I don't know if their political ideological wings, left wing and right wing, are exactly identical to ours. But do anybody on any ideological point of the spectrum in Mexico or in any of those African countries scream, "You're disenfranchising us. We can't get those things. We can't have access to the vote. You're trying to stop us from voting"? Do they say that?
No. I mean, that's the amazing thing. You go and look at these other countries, and there's agreement across the political spectrum that these are basic things that you have to have in order to ensure the sanctity of the vote that's there. And you see the same thing in Europe. You just look at the history of some of these things, like in Northern Ireland, for example, Margaret Thatcher, conservative, started to have government-issued photo IDs in the mid-'80s. But when Tony Blair, Labor, was in charge around 2000, they realized that there was counterfeiting of the IDs that were necessary to vote. And so they wanted to have government-issued, tamper-proof photo IDs. And so Labor passed new regulations on that. And they estimated that about 10% of the people who had been voting were fraudulent votes. After the statute of limitations came out, you had people from the IRA basically telling others that they had had huge kind of armies of cab drivers that would go and ferry people from one poll to another. They would have printing shops before the labor reforms where they would go and create counterfeit IDs. They would go and have safe houses where people would change wigs or change clothes to make it more difficult to identify them as doing that. And, so you have a labor government there that says about 10% of the votes that they had been having were fraudulent. So, that's the amazing thing. you don't see the type of polarization in terms of dealing with this vote fraud that you see in other countries. In other countries, a number of them used to have rules similar to what we have in the United States, but they learned the hard way about vote fraud. And one of the things people have to understand is that a lot of this vote fraud is very difficult to catch. And the reason why it's difficult to catch is that, let's say you're buying votes. Well, both the person who's paying to buy the vote and the person who's getting the money whose vote is being bought have an incentive to hide it, because they're both being made better off by the transaction.
Right.
And so, you look at some place like France, where they literally discovered that they had hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots that were fraudulent, that were being bought by the mob, for example. And the only reason why they discovered it was because a couple people had guilty consciences for the fact that that had been going on for many years. And they went to the prosecutors and turned them in. And so after 1975, France banned absentee ballots. I mean, you look at Europe. Not only do all 47 countries in Europe require government-issued photo IDs to vote, but like 39 of the 47 countries completely ban absentee ballots for people living in the country. Of the other 8 countries,
for any reason at all, right? For any reason,
no absentee ballots at all for people living in the country.
Deployed service members, though, kind of like we have, at least for that.
No,
not even them.
No,
wow.
There's 6 additional there's 8 countries that have absentee ballots, but 6 of those have basically, you either have to be in the hospital or in the military, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
But even in those countries, they don't take your word for it. You have to have third-party sworn verification, either from the hospital or the military, that indicates that you will not be available to go and vote at that time. And so, and the other thing, even these countries, even the small number of countries that have absentee ballots, they won't send them to you in the mail. You have to have a government-issued photo ID and go in person and pick up the absentee ballot. So, because they're worried that if they put it in the mail, somebody else may go and pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see any countries having the mail-in voting that we have here in the United States. It's just something that nobody has considered.
Yeah. So John, we're talking a lot about, Blacks and African nations, and Mexicans and other Hispanic nations, South American and so forth, all being totally fine with photo identification, and only citizens can register, and so on and so forth. That's what the SAVE Act does here. So we're doing the racial minority thing. What about the sex minority now? What about women? Because we're being told that we're going to disenfranchise tens of millions of women if the SAVE Act is passed, because they are not going to have any proof of what their actual name is because of their name change when they get married.
Right, if they get married. Right. Well, here's the bizarre thing about that. I was looking it up again. I already knew it, but married women tend to vote conservatively. So if somehow you have to believe that the Republicans are pushing to pass the SAVE Act because they want to reduce the number of married women voting. And again, this is something that other countries, you have to go and verify your citizenship with a birth certificate or something else. So, a marriage certificate to show a change in name. So, I mean, it's not to believe that story. One, you have to kind of think that all these other countries around the world are trying to prevent women from voting. But also you have to believe that the Republicans want to reduce the number of people who are voting for Republicans, because married women tend to disproportionately vote for Republicans.
Yeah, so that's quite an interesting claim when they say that they're trying to disenfranchise women, because that would be literally cutting their own throats, politically speaking. So what did you make then, John, of the president's presentation last Thursday night? Did the primetime address.
Right.
talked about rigged elections in the past, talked about all kinds of really, really disturbing statistics. 220 some odd million Americans' voting information has been hacked by China. Some 278,000, I think, foreign nationals,
in 4 countries,
in
4 states.
4 states, just
Right,
in 4 states. So if
Right.
we extrapolate 278,000 in 4 states out to all 50 states, we're talking millions of foreigners, non-citizens, having being registered and on the voter rolls in federal elections across this country. So, what did you make of that presentation and the left's response to it?
Well, one of the things the president pointed out with regard to that last point is that those 4 states refuse to provide voter roll information, and so it's likely an underestimate of the problem that you have in those states. So that, but even with that, 278,000 is significant. Plus, there were 10 states that they were able to look at where there was over 400,000 dead people who were still on the voter rolls in those states. And the problem that you have is that, people may be voting for those dead people. So you have all sorts of issues. And, particularly when you combine it with these mail-in votes where you just go and send it out. I lived in a state in 2000 that had mail-in voting. I lived in an apartment. I was getting ballots for the last 4 tenants that had lived in the apartment that I was in. If you go and walk through the mailroom that was there, you literally see hundreds of ballots thrown on the floor because people were getting ballots for people that weren't themselves. And, I could have picked up, hundreds of ballots and mailed them in. How would they have known that I had voted for those individuals? So
what do you make like here in Ohio? One of the things they're trying to do, and in fact, it's already going to be on the ballot in November, to enshrine into the Ohio state constitution, photo identification must be required when you vote, but that's only for in-person balloting. The General Assembly then tried to pass a bill, in fact, did pass a bill and sent it to Mike DeWine saying, oh, by the way, since we didn't include that on the constitutional amendment, ballot initiative, we're just going to make it law that mail-in voters too. If you mail in your ballot, you've got to send a copy of your driver's license. You've got to make sure to, photo driver's license to prove you are who you say you are. It was vetoed by Mike DeWine. It was vetoed by the governor, a left-wing governor, posing as a Republican. And he said because it wouldn't do any good anyway, because it wouldn't be like there would be a poll worker able to match the person and the person in the photograph of the, in the driver's license that's included in the envelope. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's some states like Georgia and Texas with regard to absentee ballots that require that people put down the last 4 digits of their Social Security numbers that are there. That got a lot of people upset that they were requiring that. But, if it were me, I might do what they do in Europe, in the few countries that have absentee ballots, and that is require that the person has to go and pick up the absentee ballot in person, and that they have to go and show a government issued photo ID when they pick it up. They could pick it up a month before the election or 2 months before the election or whatever it is that they can do it. So there's plenty of opportunity for them to go and pick it up. But Europe seems to.
What are they going to say? What are they going to say though about the homebound? About people who are disabled, elderly, they don't drive, they can't get to go pick up the absentee ballot. If they could, they would just go and vote early voting and just do it that way. Or homeless people who don't have cars and can't drive to a place, but they still get to vote. What's the response?
Right. Well, what I would say is maybe you could have some people go out in those places. I mean, I don't know how many people you're going to have that are going to be homebound like that. I assume some of these people may be in nursing homes, so there may be a number of people that have the same problem, in one place. So it may be possible to kind of lower the cost of checking on those. But, at the very least, you could go and have it so that people provide a doctor's note. I mean, not that there's not corruption with doctors. We've seen plenty of fraud type stuff that goes on, but at least it would be an additional thing that would reduce it to at least a little extent.
You get any reaction from the piece you put out in Townhall about all of this and the African nations,
No.
Latin American nations, women, and so forth? Any
I
pushback?
haven't really heard any response on it. I mean, I've gotten a couple radio interviews and stuff, but that's about it.
It says to me, John, it's, and this is the reason I wanted to have you on as soon as you sent me this. And I always appreciate when you send me your work. And I said, let's talk about this one, because what you basically pointed out here is that American Democrats think less of American Blacks and American Hispanics, because they have to know, or maybe they didn't until you did the research and showed them, that if Africans in Africa can figure out how to get photo identification and actively prove they are citizens in order to vote, which is exactly what the SAVE Act here would require if it got passed, the Save America.
Right.
If Africans in Africa can do that and figure it out, why are they suggesting that African Americans are less than capable than people in Africa, that Latin American, Central American, South American, Hispanic countries, they all require it. Mexico, you said, requires a thumbprint. What would happen if Donald Trump said, here's what we're doing from now on. In order to vote, you have to scan your thumbprint to prove who you say you are. But anyway, they say that, they can do all of that in Latin countries, but we can't expect them to figure that out here in America. Why are American minorities considered less than?
Right. Well, even if they don't know what the rules are in other countries, I have a strong feeling that the Democrats have seen the polls, and they see that Black Americans and Hispanic Americans believe overwhelmingly that, they're able to go and get IDs and able to go and vote, and that they don't believe significant majorities, and both groups don't believe that people are discriminated against. When you look at the polls, one of the interesting things is that the people who think that these types of rules discriminate against certain groups voting aren't the poor, aren't the people with low educations. The people who think that people are being disenfranchised are the wealthy and people who went to graduate school. So it's not the people who claim, you are being claimed to be affected who are concerned about this. It's the people who are presumably the least likely to be affected, people who are making over $200,000 a year in income and who went to graduate school. So it's kind of like, but you see this in lots of areas. People who go to graduate school tend to be much more liberal. They seem to be more likely to, I'll give you another related survey. You look at surveys of, would you like to federalize law enforcement in a high crime area like Trump did in DC or Memphis? I saw a survey a while ago. Blacks and Hispanics in Chicago were in favor of it by a huge majority for Hispanics, and blacks, the majority of blacks were in favor of it. The people who were against it were basically liberal whites.
White, yep.
Okay?
The awful, the angry white female liberals. The awful.
And so the people who are kind of most affected by crime, and you see this in other surveys, want to have more policing. The people who are least affected by it don't want to have the police. They have these images that they don't want to have people being protected because they think it's somehow harm, but yet the people who are going to be affected by the crime want to have protection.
Yeah, that's it's a really remarkable look, and I'm glad to hear those surveys, and I would love to hear the left explain those things away, and also why they think that blacks in America are less capable than blacks in Africa or anywhere else for that matter. But all right, I want to pivot, John, if you don't mind. Got another piece that you've been a very busy man. Well, you're always a very busy man, but here's another one you just put out a few days ago. This was for the Federalist. Trump's immigration enforcement really is slashing violent crime. Now, you're going to have to explain this to us, Dr. John Lott, because we're told by the left all of the time that Americans are responsible for a much higher rate of crime per capita than immigrants. Illegal immigrants, in particular, don't come over here and commit the violent crime that the conservative majority wants people to believe that they do. That these are, just honest people who want to come here and earn a good day's wage and improve their lot in life. That they're not bad people and not criminals at all. So how can you make such a bold claim that immigration enforcement is slashing violent crime, John?
Right. Well, look, I'll get into that specifically in a second, just kind of the 30,000 foot view. During the Biden administration, we had the largest percentage increase in total felony violent crime over the 4 years there that we've seen over any 4-year period since they've been collecting the data. It increased by 59%. I don't think it's coincidence that occurred. At the same time, we had record increases in the number of illegal immigrants coming to the country. And since then, in 2025 and this year, I think we know murders last year hit historic lows. The lowest murder the federal government's been collecting murder data since 1900. And the lowest previous murder rate that we'd ever had was 4.5 per 100,000. This last year was slightly below 4 per 100,000 for the first time. That's a big drop from what it was in 2024, for example, where it was 5 per 100,000. So look, I think when the Bureau of Justice Statistics data comes out in September, I think it will show that violent crime plummeted across the board last year. And I think eventually it'll show that it's continuing to drop this year. And there are many reasons for why it's dropping. FBI had twice as many arrests last year as they had in 2024. You have U.S. attorneys around the country who are much more actively prosecuting criminals. You look at D.C., for example, the U.S. attorneys appointed by the president. The Biden U.S. attorney refused to bring criminal charges against 67% of the people who were arrested. Judge Jeanine Pirro has only refused to bring criminal charges against 4% of the people who have been, not 67%, just 4%. And she's going after them for more severe penalties. You make it riskier for criminals to commit crime, you're going to see less crime. So that's part of it. But also the deep.
Yeah, may I interject for a moment?
Sure.
It seems almost counterintuitive. If Biden's DOJs and federal prosecutors, the DOJ and the federal prosecutors and so forth, decline to bring charges for all of these people, those crime statistics should drop, right? Because they're not being pressed. The charges aren't being pressed. So therefore, do the crimes get reported? Do they get counted in the Bureau of Crime Statistics?
Yeah, right. So there are two different things. There's when the police write up a crime report, that gets in there. Now, what the prosecutor does with it, whether they bring charges, whether the person gets prosecuted, that's a separate issue. Okay. But as long as the police, as long as you have a police report filled out, then that gets into the FBI crime data that's there. But there, as we've talked about before in your show, there are two different measures of crime. You have the crimes reported to police, and then you have total crimes, both reported and unreported. And most crimes aren't reported to police. About 43% of violent crimes are reported to police. About 30% of property crimes are reported to police. And so that's the reason why we have the Department of Justice's National Crime Victimization Survey, where they survey about 240,000 people each year. But so I wanted to circle back onto your initial question, and that is there are a couple of things to point out. One is 70% of those who have been deported had criminal records. Now, there's a lot of funny business if you go to someplace like Cato or whatever, that go and claim, well, they're only 30%. There are a couple of issues here. One is when I've been in the Department of Justice or in the Sentencing Commission or other places, a criminal record always included not only convictions, but also arrests, okay? They only want to count convictions, and they only want to count it for 4 types of crimes. If somebody's kidnapped somebody else or they're a drug dealer, they don't want to count that as a criminal record, even if you've been convicted. So if you count whether somebody's been arrested or convicted, and many times these days, if a police arrest somebody for a crime and they're taken into the local county courthouse where they're charged with the crime, then ICE will be there and pick them up. And so they'll never even go to trial. They'll be deported at that point. So those aren't being counted in those numbers. Now, you brought up this general point. Are illegal aliens committing crimes or not? And someplace like Cato, what they do is they rely on 2 different types of data. One is from the American Community Survey, which surveys a couple million people a year from the census. They survey people in prison, they survey people outside of prison, and they voluntarily ask people whether or not they're in the United States legally or not. Now, the problem that you have with that is multiple fold. One is somebody that's in prison may be more reticent. I mean, they acknowledge that illegal aliens in general are less likely to honestly say that they're in the country illegally. But those that are in prison may be even less likely to go and admit that they're in the country illegally because they could be deported if somehow they had not been identified. So they have an additional cost. But on top of that, as I just mentioned, what can frequently happen over time is that when an illegal alien is brought into a county courthouse and charged, they may be picked up by ICE at that point. So they never make it into the prison, or they may be convicted and picked up by ICE once they've been convicted of a crime. So you're going to get all the Americans who are convicted are going to end up in prison, but all the illegal aliens who commit crimes aren't going to be ending up in prison. And so you're going to have an underestimate of the share of the prison population that are illegal aliens. And you see the other type of data that a place like Cato is for Texas, and you have the same problem there with Texas. For many, many years, Texas has worked closely with ICE, where if an illegal gets picked up, if they get arrested, if they get convicted, they can very frequently be turned over immediately to ICE. And so they never make it in to the incarcerated population in the area. And so you're going to get an underestimate of the share of crimes committed by illegals by looking at their share of the incarcerated population. There has been some data that came out last fall for New York. And in New York, it turns out, and New York didn't help them with this, so this is probably clearly an underestimate, but about 14% of the incarcerated population in New York are illegals. If you compare that to the shares of the state population, they're illegals, about the highest estimate from Pew is about 4%. So illegals are overrepresented by about 3.5 times their share of the incarcerated population compared to the general population. Now, there are multiple reasons why this is an underestimate, though it's not going to be as big of an underestimate as a state like Texas or the American Community Survey, because New York doesn't cooperate a lot with ICE in terms of, and so you're less likely to have as much leakage. You'll have some in terms of people who are illegal, never make it into the incarcerated population. So the 14% is an underestimate, but it's not as much of an underestimate as it would be with the other data that's there. Anyway, and plus the fact that New York will not work with ICE in terms of identifying whether people are there illegally or not, is yet another reason for believing that those numbers are an underestimate. So, but there you have 3.5 times at least their share of the population. That should be something that concerns people.
Is there anywhere else in America where we can get that statistic?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm just wondering why that isn't in the Washington Post. Why isn't that being broadcast? I mean, I'm saying that kind of facetiously because we already know why. Because they are absolutely pro illegal.
Yeah, no, I know, I agree.
But
Look,
you know what I mean? Those stats are
you need about three of me,
John. They're jaw-dropping.
If you get about three more of me, I could probably go and work on those things. But as we're covering the number of different issues that are here, I'm kind of pulled in different directions on stuff. So I try to. I
would just like to get you in a room with Stephen Miller or some of the people who can push this stuff out to at least the places that are interested in honest journalism.
Well, look, I wish I was working in the federal government right now, having an administration like this. I'd like to be able to have the resources that are there to be able to go and do deep dives on these things. But
you do what you do. You do what you do already amazingly on probably a shoestring budget comparative to what the government could give you if you were, in a position like that. And it's still extraordinarily important and amazing work you do, John. So, and to that end, I'm going to keep you working here as long as you don't have anywhere to be. Let's get into
I'm happy to talk to you.
Let's get into one more, and this one is it's tied to the last one because we're talking about crime. And let's pop this one up. This is right from your website, from crimeresearch.org, which of course is the home base for the crime prevention research centers. So let me pop this up here for everybody to see the headline. Democrats join dramatically growing calls to abolish ICE. Some Democrats also call for defunding the police. Links to their statements on these issues are on this piece on your webpage right now. I want people to go to crimeresearch.org and check this out for themselves. But John, didn't we go through this about 6 years ago? Didn't we go through defunding and abolishing police in far too many big blue cities across this country in response to the riots after George Floyd overdosed? I thought we went through this already. They're back at it again?
Right. Well, I mean, you have members of Congress who, and those who have gotten the Democratic nominations in some places, these Democratic socialists who want to abolish prisons. They, even for murder, they don't think that there should be prison. I was listening to Mandani being quizzed about some of these individuals that he was backing, and asking, well, how can you support somebody who doesn't want to have prison even for murder? And he was saying, well, that candidate believes in the politics of life. And I'm thinking to myself, how many, do you think there'll be more murders or fewer murders if there's no punishment for murder, if you don't have police? And, so it's not exactly obvious to me how that fits in with the politics of life. But I'm
failing to make that connection myself. That's a struggle. More lives being taken when more murders happen, but you're telling us about the policy of life.
Right. No, it's hard to understand. So,
what are we looking at right here, John? If I may, let me pop that back up there. What are we looking at right here? This is on your website. This is under the article. The one that we're talking about right now, about Democrats calling for defunding the police and abolishing ICE. What is this? What's this?
Oh, that was the attack at the immigration facility in New York City, where this former soldier set a fire right in front of the building there, poured gasoline, and then hit it. That was just today.
Yeah, it sure was. I want to go ahead and go to a live action shot of this for those who did not see this. This is unbelievable, and this is the type of mindset, that carries over if they feel like there is no punishment waiting, no police, no judges or prosecutors. If they do happen to get arrested, they're not worried about prison time or anything else. And if you get rid of prisons and police, for crying out loud, how much more of this are we going to see? Because this is what we're talking about. Watch the brazenness of this.
Guys, oh my God.
I don't know who that person who videotaped it was, and it was oh my godding, but she was oh my godding for all of us. Where was that, John?
That was in New York City.
I know, but what was the building? Do we know? Was it a building?
I saw it. I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, I can't
It's
either.
like the immigration. It was like the immigration court.
Yeah, and this individual was found to have anti-ICE paraphernalia on him as well. So it was very, very
Right.
clear. Oh, yeah, you're right, John. It's right there. It says it was outside the immigration court in New York City. So you're correct. And he had anti-ICE paraphernalia or propaganda, whatever. And Tom Homan went off on this. Tom Homan was just like, what do you expect these types of unhinged people to do? The ones that are anti-ICE, when they're being told on a daily basis all the time by the left-wing media and the left-wing Democrats on Capitol Hill that ICE is the Gestapo, that ICE is, they're the killers and the brown shirts and so on and so forth. What do you expect these lunatics to do other than exactly what they're doing? Commit violent acts, put Lord knows how many lives in danger by setting things on fire. This is what it brings when you decide that the law enforcement agents are the enemies. They're the bad guys, and the lawbreakers are the anti-heroes.
Right. Yeah. No, it's kind of amazing. I mean, you have something like 65 of the Democratic members of the House who voted in favor of completely defunding ICE. You have a number of very prominent members of the Democratic caucus who have come out and said, we just need to completely get rid of ICE. So I don't know what they think, and also prisons, which we were talking about before. I'm looking at this is again for folks who want to check this out, and I want you to go to crimeresearch.org. You'll see this on John's site, and you can read this middle part of this. Some Democrats, like Daraliza Avila Chevalier, who won the Democratic nomination for Congress in New York City, wants to abolish prisons. Rashida Tlaib, policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. No more, look at the last words in that line I've highlighted. No more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It can't be reformed. Sharia Tlaib is literally in Congress right now, not like Chevalier, who's on her way, but in Congress right now, and she's saying no more police, no more prisons, no more military or militarization of law enforcement. Right. I mean, you have people like Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, who are kind of the moderates because they only want to cut the prison population in half.
Yeah, that's right underneath it there.
So, but, and then I have a list of Congress people who have come out and there are links there that people can click on to see their statements about abolishing ICE. And, it's just, and then you have there's like 65 members of Congress who are either who are co-sponsors or the sponsor of the Drain ICE Act of 2026, which would cut all funding for ICE. And then you had 61 Democrats who voted against a resolution that was condemning calls to defund police. So you have 61 of the members of the Democratic Congressional Caucus who apparently are in favor of completely defunding the police. So, it just...
I'm looking at a couple of these in your quotes here, John, from these members of Congress, and a couple of them stand out even more than others. Robin Kelly, whose name isn't, not as well known as Ro Khanna, Jihad Omar, Sharia Tlaib, Pramila Jayapal, and some of the others, ADC, Alexandria Damasio-Cortez. We hear all of those names. You don't hear the name of Robin Kelly very much, but look at this one in the middle here. Representative Robin Kelly from Illinois. Dismantle ICE, but also Border Patrol. The agency that looks over citizenships, all of it needs to be dismantled. John, I'm not trying to oversell this, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic about it, but isn't that basically calling for the surrender of the republic? The organization that looks over citizenship, gone.
Right.
No citizenship matters anymore. Just come and go as you please.
Yeah, I mean, you think that would create some problems if you can't identify who are American citizens or not. So, But
and you cannot control their behavior because there is no
Right.
prison, there's no police, and so forth. I mean, it's just like they're literally calling for, and I don't know if this word is overused or underused. I think probably underused. They're calling for anarchy, a system where
well,
there
maybe
are
that's
no
what they want.
laws. It's
Anarchy.
Thunderdome.
Right. Well, I mean, it's surely what they're going to get. And the thing that's clear just by looking at the primaries for the Democrats this year, the Democratic Congress this next term is going to be even further in that direction than the current one is.
You're right. Given the numbers that we're seeing right now and the way some of these primaries are going, and the number of DSA members, Democratic Socialists of America, which is just nothing more than a lot of people have said it. I mean, socialism is dog crap, and democratic socialism is dog crap with sprinkles on top. It's still crap. And that's the best way to describe it. There's no modifier that's going to make it any less dangerous than what it is. And what these people are calling for, John, you've listed here. So you're talking about Trump's deportation initiative has slashed violent crime. They want to stop deportations, which will, by simple inference there, will increase violent crime. And then they don't want any police to arrest violent criminals when they do it. And they don't want any prisons for them.
And they don't want the Border Patrol there to stop illegals from coming into the country.
I mean, so like I said, I mean, I'm not trying to overstate it. And maybe it sounds like I am, but they're literally calling for, an end to the republic. Did you hear, I'm really chasing squirrels now, John. I'll give you one last question before we go. The leader of the DSA in New York City, somebody named, what was his name? I was talking about him all day on yesterday's show. His name is Gustavo Gordillo.
It just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah, Gustavo Gordillo.
Right.
He came to the United States from Peru.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, I think I saw this.
Did you see this one? He came
I think
to the
so.
United
Yeah,
States
and he was.
It is pretty astounding when he said why. He told Martha McCallum why his family came to the United States from Peru, and the answer was, paraphrasing now, because Peru had become kind of overtaken by capitalism and American imperialism. So in order to get away from capitalism and American imperialism, they decided to flee to where?
Right.
America. There's no American imperialism in America. There's no capitalism here in this capitalist country. So it's just the insanity of it all, John.
Right.
And this is what the DSA, he's a member of it, and this is what the Democrats, in bigger picture, the whole party, this is what they envision as this country is supposed to look like. I don't know. I'll give you the last word.
Well, I've been to a lot of South American countries. I've been to Peru. I think if they could have less government there and more free enterprise and stuff, they'd probably be a lot better off. But they have lots of crime problems down in those countries in South America. I think they're starting to change, but they have a lot to do. And if he looks around the world, I mean, he can look at Venezuela. Venezuela obviously went in a direction that you would think that he would think would be more akin to. Venezuela used to be the wealthiest country in South America. Now I think it may be the poorest that's there.
Yeah.
And
in a very short period of time too. It was less than 20 years. I think they went from being the wealthiest to the worst.
Yeah. And so, if he thinks that that's the type of model, he can go and explain why he thinks Chavez was such a great leader.
John, last real question for you here, because and this is just kind of for fun, I guess. Not that it's really fun to think like this, but I've been kind of kicking this around on the show anyway. So I'm going to ask you, if the United States as we know her fell, and I'm talking about the DSA, gets a whole bunch of new members of Congress, and the socialist wing of the Democrat Party becomes the mainstream wing, and some of the things that we're talking about start to happen, and the borders disappear, and the prisons disappear, and the crime rate soars, and centralized government and private property starts to be taken away, and wealth taxes are implemented, and collectivism starts to take over here. Now, obviously, that is an absolute dystopian nightmare scenario for America, and it's a long shot. As long as we still have our lungs, we'll fight that.
Well, I don't think it's a long shot. I mean, you look at,
right.
well, I mean, look, basically all the Democrats in the Senate, with the possible exception, maybe Fetterman has changed his mind on this, support getting rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
All the Democrats in the Senate, except for maybe Fetterman, support packing the Supreme Court. Yep. All the Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee support packing the Supreme Court, increasing the number of justices there. You have Puerto Rico and DC as states. You'll pick up 4 more Democratic senators and maybe 12 more Democratic members of the House. They want to go and ban government-issued photo IDs for voting, something we talked about earlier. They want to mandate that mail-in ballots be the law of the land across the entire country.
Probably 6 more Supreme Court justices, or did you say that part?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know how many more, but packing it, they're talking about either 13 or 15 total. You're going to see all the things that you're talking about could be done by them.
Okay.
And,
so hypothetically speaking, let's say that nightmare scenario materializes. I would like to think that there are enough patriotic Americans left that would say, no, we're going to stay and fight this, and literally, have a civil war situation. But for those who are not Civil War minded and cannot fight, and they say, we've got to go, we've got to get. I played a Reagan clip from this Shining City on a Hill a few weeks ago that I had totally forgotten existed, in which he talking with somebody and a Cuban defector who had come to the United States. And they were talking about how lucky they are, to not have been like that. And the Cuban defector looked at them and said, I'm lucky because I had somewhere to go.
Right.
Reagan said, if the United States falls and we need to flee, where the hell are we going to flee? We got nowhere to go if the United States falls. So with that premise in mind, John, this is just my little kind of goof around question. Where would you go? Where would you tell people to go? You've done enough world traveling. What nation would be a place where you could go if the United States fell in such a way?
I don't know. I mean, maybe Argentina could be someplace. I have to learn Spanish finally, but Australia is probably not a place I would go. New Zealand's
20 years ago it would have been. 20 years ago, I would have said Australia.
Yeah, well, 20 years ago, I was offered the chairmanship of the economics department at Australian University, National University. But, I don't know. I mean, maybe New Zealand. I don't know. But even that's pretty much far gone.
Isn't it funny, though? We're not saying any of the Western European nations that have been our strongest allies through the years. We're not saying the UK anymore, anywhere in the UK. We're not saying England. Italy. We're not saying Germany. The Western European countries we would have thought would be the best place for us. Nope, not a chance. They're falling before if we fall, they're going to fall before that. They're already on the way.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, they've already greatly restricted free speech and other things in the European Union, and Australia too, for that matter. And under the previous prime minister in New Zealand, she was pretty much the same way. So I don't know, I guess I'll look at it.
I want people to think about it. Just yeah. And the reason, John, the reason I'm asking it, I'm asking my viewers and listeners and everybody else I can on social media, followers and so forth, to ponder that for a moment. Because when you come to the conclusion that Reagan was right and there is nowhere for us to go, and to be able to have anything even resembling what we had here if we let it go.
Well, I hope people will take that into account when they decide whether to vote in the fall, those types of things. if the Democrats take control of Congress and the presidency, we just talked about some of the stuff that could happen. So, anyway,
that's the point.
At least you're out there trying to help educate people on it. So I appreciate that.
Well, John, I appreciate all of the education you provide on all of these articles. And I know you got more coming up as well. Tell people go to Crime Prevention Research Center at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org, and make sure you follow Dr. Lott on Twitter and every other social media platform where you can find him. You'll educate yourself every single time you do. Thank you, Dr. Lott.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks very much.
You got it.